The grand muster of the Long Concord was held once every 11 years above the forge world of Kesh SubMarshal, and it was, by ancient custom, a counting of teeth. 2,000 warships hung in tiered ranks over the planet's iron-colored clouds, arranged not by species or by seniority, but by throw weight, so that any delegate looking out of any window could read the true hierarchy of the galaxy the way a child reads a number line. Nearest the ceremonial axis floated the Kesh dreadnoughts, 90 of them, each one 4 kilometers of black laminate hull studded with spinal accelerators that could crack a moon's crust. Behind them the Sulvani battle spheres, then the Cathan lance frames, then the long silver needles of the Orevid, and on outward, rank after rank, the ships getting smaller and the delegates inside them getting quieter, until at the very outer edge of the formation there were the humans. Lieutenant Sana Okafor had been staring at the human ships for most of an hour, because it was easier than looking at anyone's face. There were 6 of them. That was the entire Terran contribution to the Grand Muster, and even calling them warships required a generosity of spirit that the Long Concord had never been famous for. They were blunt. They were slab-sided. They had the proportions of grain silos that had been given engines by mistake. Their hulls were a dull working gray, scuffed and patched and pocked with the honest scars of 200 years of hard use, and every one of them carried more airlocks than gun ports. The largest, the Long Patience Asterisk, was 3 kilometers from bow to stern and was, in the technical language of the Concord's assessment office, a vessel of indeterminate martial purpose. Everyone in the Terran service had read that assessment. It had been passed around the mess decks like a joke that had stopped being funny somewhere around the 50th reading. "You are looking at your fleet," said a voice beside her, the way a farmer looks at a field in a dry year. Sana straightened. She was 26 years old. She was the junior-most officer in the Terran delegation by 4 ranks and 11 years. And she was, at this precise moment, the only human being on the flag deck of the Kesh Dreadnought Asterisk 9th Verdict Asterisk, which meant she represented her species to a room of 900 people who thought her species was a rounding error. She turned around slowly, and she made her face polite. Fleet Marshal Viharo Setkan was the tallest living thing she had ever stood next to. The Kesh were built on a heavy world, and it showed in every line of them. The deep chest, the slab of the shoulders, the long jaw armored in overlapping plates the color of old bronze. He wore no decorations. The Kesh measured a soldier by the ships he had commanded, and Viharo Setkan had commanded the Asterisk 9th Verdict for 61 years, which in the arithmetic of the Grand Muster made him something close to a geological feature. "Marshal," she said. "Lieutenant." He looked out at the human ships with her. He had the courtesy, at least, not to pretend he was looking at anything else. "Which one is yours?" "None of them, sir. I came out on a courier." Ah, a slow blink, the inner membrane sliding sideways, and before the courier. "Anchor of ours Asterisk, sir. Lift branch, 3rd Division." "Lift branch." He said the words the way a man handles an unfamiliar tool, turning it, looking for the edge. "I have read your service organization 4 times. It defeats me. Your Admiralty lists 11 branches and only 3 of them appear to be for fighting. Tell me, Lieutenant, what are the other 8 for?" Sana kept her eyes on the Long Patience Asterisk. Out beyond it, a Kesh tender crossed the formation, and for a moment the little human ship was silhouetted against 4 kilometers of dreadnought, and the comparison was so brutally unkind that she felt it land somewhere under her sternum. "Moving things, sir," she said. The Marshal was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "that is what worries me." The muster's first sitting opened at the 9th hour with the reading of strength, and the reading of strength was exactly what it sounded like. Each member species stood in turn and declared its order of battle: hulls, tonnage, spinal weight, crew. It was recited aloud, in full, because the Long Concord had been founded 4,000 years ago on the principle that wars are started by uncertainty and ended by arithmetic, and if every species knew precisely how badly it would lose, nobody would be tempted to find out. It had worked, more or less, ever since, the single most successful piece of political engineering in the history of the galaxy, and Sana had genuinely admired it right up until the moment she had to sit through it. The Kesh went first, 90 dreadnoughts, 400 cruisers, 11,000 escorts. The numbers rolled out of Sub-Marshal Vorsath's throat like stones down a hillside, and when he finished, the assembly struck their palms once against their seat arms in the old salute, and the sound was like a wave breaking. Then the Sulvani, the Cathin, the Oravid, the Talon, the Vesh, down and down through the long roll of the Concord's members, each recitation shorter than the last, until the palm strikes grew thin and polite and finally stopped altogether, and the delegates began, very quietly, to talk among themselves. "The Terran Compact," said the speaker. Ambassador Denard rose. She was a small woman in her 60s with iron-colored hair cut short, and a face that gave away exactly nothing, and Sana, sitting 4 rows behind her in the observer's gallery, felt her own heart start to beat too hard. "The Terran Compact fields," Denard said, 11 line vessels of the second class, 41 escorts, and 210 patrol craft. Spinal weight, none. We carry no capital armament. The silence that followed was not a shocked silence. It was worse. It was the silence of a room that had heard this before and had gotten bored of it. "And your reserve," said the speaker wearily. "The Terran Compact maintains a reserve," Denard said. "Its registry is filed with this body as Annex 6. Annex 6 is sealed. It has been sealed for 194 years. Yes." The speaker was Talon, small and gray and endlessly patient, and even she let a note of exasperation into her voice. "Ambassador, the reading of strength is not a courtesy. It is the foundation of this Concord. Every species in this hall has laid its throat bare on this floor. You are asking to be the only member who does not." "We're not asking for anything," Denard said. "The annex exists, it's filed, it's counted. It's simply sealed under Article 9 at the discretion of the filing member, and we have chosen to keep it so." "Why?" And there it was. The question the Concord had been asking humanity for nearly 2 centuries, in every register from polite to furious, and everyone in the Terran service knew the answer was going to be the same one it had always been. "Because we don't think you'd read it correctly," Denard said. The hall did not erupt. That was not the Concord's way, but it made a sound, a low, spreading, grinding sound of 900 delegates all deciding the same thing at once, and Sub-Marshal Vorsath rose from the Kesh benches with his crest flat against his skull. "Speaker," he said, "the Kesh Ascendancy requests that this body finally say aloud what it has been thinking quietly for 200 years. The Sub-Marshal is recognized." Ilek turned. He did not look at Denard. He looked up at the observer's gallery, and he found Sana, the only human face in it, and he held her eyes while he spoke, and she understood that this was deliberate, and that she was meant to carry it home. "There are 2 possibilities," Ilek said. "The first is that Annex 6 contains a fleet, a great fleet, a hidden armament of such scale that its disclosure would end this Concord, and so the humans keep it sealed and smile at us, and every year they smile they grow stronger. That is the possibility that keeps my staff awake. The second possibility is that Annex 6 is empty, that there is no reserve, that the humans have been bluffing an entire galaxy for 194 years with a locked box that has nothing inside it, because they are ashamed. Because they build barns and call them battleships. Because when the reading of strength comes around, they have nothing to read, and a sealed envelope is more dignified than an empty mouth." Somewhere in the hall someone laughed. It was a small sound. It was not a cruel one particularly. That was somehow the worst part. I do not know which possibility is true, Ilek said. I know which one I believe, and I will say this to the human delegation plainly as a soldier because I think it is owed to them. A species that cannot show its strength has no strength. He sat down. Ambassador Denard did not answer. She stood there for perhaps 5 seconds, and then she inclined her head, very slightly, the way you might acknowledge a remark about the weather, and she sat down too. And Sana Okafor sat in the gallery with her hands flat on her knees and her face burning in thought, with a clarity that surprised her. He's wrong, and I can't tell him, and neither can she, and that is the whole shape of my life. The news came in at the 14th hour, while the assembly was arguing about tariff rates on hyperlane relay maintenance. It came in the way the very worst news always comes in, not as an alarm but as an interruption, a small ripple at the back of the hall, an aide leaning over to whisper to a delegate, the delegate going very still. Then another, then a section, then the speaker's own console lit, and she read it, and she stopped talking in the middle of a sentence and did not start again. Sana's slate buzzed against her thigh. She looked down. Priority 1, Concord Survey Office, all delegations. Object designation KTHRA 9. Class, Degenerate Stellar Remnant stripped. Mass, 0.61 solar. Velocity, 1,140 km/s, hyperbolic. Trajectory, TESHEN system. Periastron, 84 days. Note, trajectory passes within 0.004 AU of Tessarine. She read it 3 times. The words made sense individually. It took a third pass for them to make sense together. Then she looked up, across the hall at the Vesh benches. The Vesh were not a large delegation. They were a quiet, agricultural, deeply strange species, tall and slow and gray-green, with skin like bark and long, patient hands, and they had never built a warship in their history, and had joined the Concord 400 years ago precisely so that they would never have to. Their homeworld was Tessarine, 3rd planet of the star Tessarine, and it was famous throughout the settled galaxy for exactly one thing: the groves. There were 3,100 million Vesh living on Tessarine. And an object with 2/3, the mass of a star, was going to pass close enough to it that the tides would peel the crust off the planet like skin off fruit. Sana looked at the Vesh delegates and saw that they had not moved. Not one of them. They sat in their long, patient rows with their long, patient hands folded, and they had read the same message she had, and they were simply sitting there absorbing it, the way a tree absorbs a season. "Speaker," said Sub-Marshal Ilek Vorsath, and his voice was different now, not cruel, not scoring points, just flat and enormously tired, the voice of a man who has just been handed a bill he already knew was coming. The Kesh ascendancy moves that this body convene the ledger. The speaker closed her eyes. "Seconded," said the Solvani. "Seconded," said the Cathin. "So moved," said the speaker. And Sana Okafor, 26 years old, sat very still in the observer's gallery of the Grand Muster and watched the Long Concord of settled stars reach, with terrible gentleness, for its oldest and most honest document. The ledger of necessary loss was not a cruel thing. That was what nobody outside the Concord ever understood. It had been written 800 years ago, after the Marathon Cascade, when 4 inhabited worlds had died over 11 years because 6 great powers had spent those 11 years arguing about who would pay for the lifeboats. 2 billion people had been lost to a rescue effort that never stopped being planned and never once started. In the wreckage of that, the Concord had written the ugliest, kindest document in its history, a formal, binding, arithmetic procedure for deciding, in advance, who could be saved. It did not ask what was right. It asked what was possible. It counted hulls and berths and days and burn times, and it produced a number. And everyone agreed in advance to accept that number without argument, because the alternative, The marathon alternative was to argue until the number was 0. It was a document written by grief. Sana had studied it at the academy. She had cried, actually cried, in a library carol at 19, reading the preamble which contained the sentence, "We will not again lose a world to hope." The Concord convened the ledger in the small hall, and it took 9 hours, and Sana sat in the corner as the only Terran officer present, because the ambassador had to stay with the assembly, and somebody had to be in the room. The Concord's logistics staff were not incompetent, and they were not stingy. They went at it like people fighting a fire. They counted every hull in the sector, and then in 3 sectors, and then every hull the Concord had. They counted Kesh troop transports, and then recalculated for civilians, who need more room and more air than soldiers do, and who come with children. They counted the Sulvani grain haulers. They counted the Cathan ore barges and worked out, honestly, how many people you could put in an ore barge without killing them, and the answer was, fewer than you would like, and only if the trip was short. Then they counted the round trips, and that was where the ledger did what the ledger always did. 61 usable days, said the Sulvani logistician, in the flat voice of someone reading a diagnosis. Best case, we can bring 4,100 hulls to Tessarine. Mean lift capacity, adjusted for life support and transit, is 9,600 per hull per rotation. Rotation time to the nearest habitable receiving world is 19 days. That gives us 3 rotations, possibly 4 if we accept losses. Nobody said anything. The number, the Sulvani said, is 118 million. Sana felt the room go out from under her. 3,100,000,000 people on the surface, 118 million lifted. 3.8%. We will lift the archives, said the Cathan delegate quietly. The seed stock, the gene lines, the young. That is the ledger, agreed the Sulvani. That is the ledger, said the speaker. And Sub-Marshal Vorsath, who had spent the morning humiliating a human ambassador in front of the galaxy, put his enormous armored head into his enormous armored hands, and sat like that for a long, long time, and nobody in the room thought less of him for it. Sana got up. Her legs did not feel like hers. "Speaker," she said, and her voice came out wrong, too young, too high. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Speaker, Lieutenant Okafor, Terran Compact observing, permission to file a survey packet." The speaker looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "A what?" "A survey packet, standard Concord form, object parameters, planetary census, timeline, receiving world distances. She swallowed. It's a routine filing, speaker. Any member may transmit the ledger's working data to its own government. Article 12. Why? Sana looked at her. She looked at the Kesh Sub-Marshal with his head in his hands. She looked at the Vesh observer standing by the door, a tall gray-green shape, motionless, who had not spoken once in 9 hours, and who had just been told that 96% of her people were an entry in a ledger. "Because it's the procedure, speaker," Sana said, "and because somebody at home is going to want to see it." The speaker made a small, hopeless gesture. "File it, Lieutenant." So Sana Okafor sat down at the corner console in the small hall on HFY, and she attached the ledger's own arithmetic to a standard Form 12 survey packet, and she addressed it to Terran Reserve Command, and in the free text field at the bottom, where officers were supposed to write things like "no anomalies," and for information only asterisk, she stopped and thought, and typed 9 words. 3,100,000,000, 61 days, please. Then she sent it, and went to find somewhere private to be sick. The answer came back in 19 hours, which was, she would realize much later, almost exactly the round-trip light lag to Sol plus the time it takes 11 people to make the largest decision in the history of their species. It was 4 words long. It did not come to her. It came to the speaker, and to the Kesh ascendancy, and to every delegation in the grand muster simultaneously, on the open Concord Channel, which was itself so unprecedented that half the hall thought it was a systems failure. Terran compact to Long Concord. Hold, we are coming. And 40 minutes after that, a second message, and this one was not to the Concord at all. It was a formal filing, submitted to the registry office, in the dry, unbeautiful language of galactic administrative procedure, and it was the reason that 194 years of quiet contempt was about to end. Member filing Terran Compact. RE, Annex 6 SEALED Article 9. Action unseal. Effective immediately. The Kesh Dreadnought * ninth verdict made the crossing to Tessarine in 9 days, and Sana Okafor spent every one of them being watched. She had been attached to VHARO SETCON staff by a decision she was not consulted about, explained to her in a single line of orders, Terran liaison to Concord Relief Command. Ambassador Denard had signed it. When Sana had gone to ask her why the junior-most officer in the delegation, why her, Denard had looked at her for a while with those flat, unreadable eyes and said, "Because you're the only one of us who filed." "Ma'am, that was a routine." "I know what it was," Denard said. "So does everyone else." "Go do your job, Lieutenant." So she went, and she lived for 9 days in a cabin sized for a Kesh, in a bed she could lie across sideways, and everywhere she walked she felt the eyes. The Kesh did not hate her. That was the strange thing. They were, if anything, embarrassed for her on her behalf, the way you are embarrassed for a child who has promised something enormous at a dinner table and now must sit through the rest of the meal. Hold, we are coming. 4 words. Every Kesh on that ship had read them and done the same arithmetic the Concord's logistics staff had done. And there was no arithmetic in the universe by which 4 words and 6 grain silo warships added up to 3 billion people. On the 6th day, Sub-Marshal Vorsath came to find her in the observation blister. He did not sit. There was nothing on the *9th verdict small enough for a human to sit on comfortably anyway, and Sana had taken to perching on a coolant housing like a bird on a fence. "You will be present when we arrive," he said. "Yes, sir." "You will stand on my flag deck and you will watch a Vesh speaker be told that her world is an entry in a document." His crest was flat. "And when your fleet does not come, because it will not come, Lieutenant, because there is no fleet, you will stand there anyway. That is the price of those 4 words. Do you understand me?" Sana looked at him. She was very tired and she had stopped, somewhere around the 4th day, being frightened of him. "Sir," she said, "may I ask you something?" "Ask." "You said there were 2 possibilities, a great hidden fleet or an empty box." She turned the slate over in her hands. "Which one are you hoping for?" Vorsath was silent for a long moment. "Empty," he said at last. "I'm hoping for empty, Lieutenant. Because if the box is empty, then your people are only liars, and liars can be lived with." He turned to go. "And if it is full, then for 194 years I have been sitting across a table from something that could have taken everything I love whenever it chose and simply did not. I have no doctrine for that. I have no word for it." Tessarine from orbit did not look like a world that was about to die. It looked like a world that had been loved for a very long time. The Vesh had been a spacefaring people for 1100 years and had never, in all that time, built a city taller than the trees. Their continents were a deep unbroken green shading to a gray-green so dark it read as black at the poles, veined with the pale silver lines of their canal roads, and there were no lights, not the way human worlds had lights. There were only long soft glows in the valleys where the grove towns sat, warm and low and scattered, like coals under ash. Sana stood on the flag deck of the *9th verdict and looked down at 3,100,000,000 people and could not find a single thing to say. "Marshal Setcon," said the comm officer. "Tessarine Planetary Authority requests contact." "The Speaker of Groves." "Put her through." The The Speaker of Groves was called Tehanuith. She was 2.5 meters tall, and her skin was the color of wet bark, and her eyes were small and dark and set deep. And when the hollow resolved, she was standing outdoors in a grove, with light coming down through leaves behind her. She did not ask for reassurance. She did not weep. She said, "Marshal, thank you for coming. I have read the ledger." Setkan bowed his enormous head. "Speaker, I am sorry." "Do not be sorry yet. Be useful first and sorry afterward if there is time." She said it without heat. 118 million. I have 3 days to tell my people which of them will live. I would like the Concord's help in doing that fairly, because I am not certain I can be trusted to do it fairly alone. You will have it. Thank you. Her long hands folded. There is a complication. Name it. The Anchored, Tehanuith said. Sana felt the flag deck go very quiet around her. She had read about the Anchored, everyone had, in the way that everyone reads about the strange customs of species they will never meet, a paragraph in a xenology text filed under asterisk of interest. The Vesh lived a long time, and when they came to the end, the very old among them went into the groves and they rooted. It was not a metaphor. Their bodies changed. Their legs fused and split and went down into the soil, and they stood there for years, sometimes decades, drawing water, slowing, thinking, and the young came and sat with them and talked, and the Anchored answered, slower and slower, until 1 year they didn't. There were 4 million of them on Tessarine, and they could not be moved. To pull an Anchored from the earth was, biologically, to sever every artery in a body at once, and culturally, to commit an act so far outside the Vesh moral imagination that their language did not have a verb for it. The ledger counts my people as movable, Tehanuith said. 4 million of them are not, and the ledger does not include the 11 million who will not leave them, their children, their grovekin. I have already had this argument, Marshal, in 900 villages, and I have lost it in everyone. They will not board. They will sit down in the roots and they will wait for the sky. Setkan stood very still. 15 million, he said. 15 million, she agreed. It hardly matters, does it? Against 3 billion. It is a rounding error, Marshal. That is what I keep telling myself. It is a rounding error, and I am ashamed of myself for the fact that it is the only part of this I can still feel. And Sana Okafor, junior lieutenant, lift branch, 3rd Division, standing at the back of a Kesh flag deck with her boots not quite touching the deck plates on the raised step, she'd had to stand on to see over the rail, heard herself speak. "Speaker," she said. "How deep?" Every head on the flag deck turned. Tehanuith's small dark eyes found her. "I beg your pardon." "The roots," Sana said. Her mouth had gone completely dry. "How deep do they go?" "Lieutenant," said Setkan, in a tone of warning. "Sir, I need to know how deep." She stepped forward to the rail. Her hands were shaking and she put them behind her back. "Speaker, please, an average, a maximum. How deep do the roots of an Anchored go, and how wide, and what's the soil, loam, clay? Is there bedrock under the groves?" The Speaker of Groves looked at her for a very long time. 8 meters, she said slowly. 9 in the old ones. The spread is perhaps 12 across. The grove soil is a black loam over a granite shelf, and it is between 4 and 20 meters deep depending on the valley, and she stopped. Something moved across her face. "Child, why are you asking me the depth of my dead?" "They're not dead," Sana said. "Lieutenant Okafor," said Setkan, "you will explain yourself." Sana turned to him, and for the first time in 9 days, for the first time, honestly, since she had walked into the grand muster and watched a room full of gods laugh at her ships, something came up in her chest that was not shame. "Sir," she said, "you keep asking what the other 8 branches are for." She was, of course, absolutely out of line. They put her in a compartment off the flag deck and left her there for 6 hours, and she sat on a Kesh bench with her feet dangling and understood, with a kind of clinical calm, that she had just ended her career. It didn't even feel bad. It felt like putting down something heavy. At the 6th hour the hatch opened, and Vesh Khan came in alone and closed it behind him. He was holding something, a small dark cylinder about the length of his forearm, sealed at both ends with a red compound, stamped with a sigil she didn't recognize. "Do you know what this is?" he said. "No, sir." "No, you would not." He turned it over. "It came aboard 4 hours ago by courier from Kesh Sub-Marshal. It is a sealed instrument of the ascendancy. There have been 11 issued in 400 years. 6 were never opened. 3 ended wars." He looked at it as though it were something that had died in his hand. "It is to be opened by the commanding officer of the *9th verdict, upon the unsealing of Tessarine Annex 6, and not before, and not by anyone else." "I have not opened it." "Sir, I have carried instruments before, Lieutenant. I know their weight. This one is heavy." He set it down, very carefully, on the bench beside her, which she understood was a gesture of such profound and dangerous trust that her hands went cold. "Your annex is unsealed. It was unsealed 9 days ago. I am, at this moment, in violation of an order of my own government, by the simple fact that I have not broken that seal." "Why haven't you?" "Because I am a coward," said Fleet Marshal Vesh Khan, 61 years in command, and he said it perfectly evenly, the way you would state a fuel reading. "Because for 9 days I have been standing in the last hour of my life in which I do not know what your people are, and I find that I have wanted that hour very badly." He looked at her. "Tell me what to expect," he said. "Not as a marshal, not as the conquered. As one officer to another on a ship going to a world that is going to die, tell me what is coming, and I will decide afterward what to do with this." And Sana Okafor, 26, Lift Branch, thought about her mother. Her mother had been a lift officer too, and Sana had been born on a hull and raised in the cassette racks, and the first thing she could ever remember was the sound. Not engines. The other sound. The great slow rhythmic clanging lock of habitat cassettes coming up the spine of a ship and seeding into their frames, one every 40 seconds, day and night, for weeks. Human ships were built around a hole. That was the joke, and the joke was the doctrine, and the doctrine was 200 years old. Every Terran hull above 400 meters, merchant, naval, survey, anything, was built to a single structural pattern, the common hull. A spine, a drive, a bridge, and a vast standardized void. And into the void went cassettes, 40-meter modules, all identical, all interchangeable, that slid in and locked and plugged into the spine's power and water and air like a magazine into a rifle. You could load a common hull with ore, with grain, or fuel cells, or fabrication modules, or the big ugly agricultural units that turned it into a fish farm. Or you could load it with people. Habitat cassette pattern 4, 40 meters by 12, 1600 berths, 90 days of closed-loop life support, coming off the line at the Callisto Works at a rate of 1 every 11 minutes. There were, at last count, 400 million of them stacked in orbital depots across human space, and to look at them was to look at nothing at all. Stacks of gray boxes, ugly, cheap, boring. And every common hull in human space, every freighter, every ore boat, every tramp merchant hauling luxury goods to Vega, could be at a depot in 70 hours, be loaded in 9 and go. That was Annex 6. That was what was in the box. Not a fleet, a asterisk pattern asterisk, a single obsessive 200-year-old habit drilled into an entire civilization until it was as invisible as breathing. Build everything so that it can carry people, because one day you will have to carry people. "We had a bad century," Sana said out loud. Vesh Khan waited. "That's the whole answer, sir, and it's not a good story, and we don't tell it at the Concord because it makes us look like fools." She rubbed her face. "The oceans came up. We knew they would." We'd known for 100 years and we argued about it instead, and when it happened we had to move 600 million people and we couldn't. We had ships and trucks and planes and we could not move 600 million people in a hurry because nothing fit anything else. Every hull was different. Every port was different. Every crate was a different size. We spent 11 years arguing about lifeboats. She laughed once wetly. That's in your ledger, sir, the preamble. We will not again lose a world to hope. Some marathon wrote that 800 years ago and I cried over it when I was 19. And I want you to understand that we wrote almost the exact same sentence, on our own, out of our own dead, and we did not know the Concord existed. And what did you do? We standardized, Sana said. That's it, that's the whole thing. We got very, very serious about the size of boxes. Setkan looked at her. Then after, she said, the ash winters. Then Deneb, the ring colonies came apart. We lost 800,000 people in 90 hours because a Habring failed, and there were no holes in the system that could take them. And after Deneb, they passed the Pattern Act, and it was the ugliest, dullest, most boring piece of legislation in our history. And every human being alive complained about it for 40 years. And what it said was, every hull you build to fit. Every port you build to fit. And every 10 years you practice. Practice, said Setkan. Yes, sir. Practice what? Sana looked up at him. Leaving, she said. Everyone, all at once. It's called a general lift and we run one every 10 years and I've been in 4 of them and I hated every minute of everyone. And the last one, 5 years ago, we cycled 2.4 billion people through berths in 19 days as a asterisk drill asterisk. She spread her hands. Sir, we don't have a hidden fleet. We have 390,000 civilian hulls, and every one of them is a troop ship that has never carried a troop. We've been showing you for 200 years. You looked at our warships and you counted our guns and you got a number and the number was small, and you stopped counting. The compartment was quiet. Your sub-marshal asked which possibility he was hoping for, she said. The Great Fleet or the empty box. Sir, with respect, he never once considered the third thing. And what is the third thing? That the box is full, Sana said, of something he doesn't have a word for. Fleet Marshal Setkan stood in that compartment for a long time after she stopped talking. Then he picked up the sealed instrument of the ascendancy and turned it over once in his hand and did not open it and put it in his coat. Lieutenant Okafor, he said. Sir, how many can you lift? And Sana Okafor discovered that she was crying, and that she had been for some time, and that she did not care in the slightest. Sir, she said, I don't know, nobody's ever asked us. The first human ship arrived at Tessarine at 04, 11 fleet time, 11 days before anyone expected it, and it was a disappointment. It was called the Asterisk Bellwether, and it was 340 meters long, smaller than a Kesh escort, and it was shaped like a brick with an apology at one end. It arrived alone. It did not hail the Concord flagship. It did not request a berth or an escort or a diplomatic reception. It came in on a shallow parabola, dropped into a low polar orbit over Tessarine, and began, with no announcement of any kind, to fly a survey grid. Sub-Marshal Eilik Vorsath watched it on the plot for 6 hours. What is it doing? He said finally. Surveying, sir, said Sana. Surveying asterisk what? The planet is mapped. It has been mapped for 400 years. Every canal, every grove, every. Not mapped like this, sir. She leaned over the rail and pointed. The asterisk Bellwether asterisk S track had already laid down 1,100 kilometers of narrow, color-coded ribbon across the northern continent, and the colors matched no Concord survey standard. That's a load survey. It's not measuring the ground. It's measuring what the ground can take, bearing capacity, soil density, where you can set down a 100,000-ton hull without it sinking, where the granite shelf comes up close enough to take a landing frame, where the water table is, so you know where you can't." She traced the ribbon with a finger. "It's building a map of every place in the world where a ship can stand up." Ilek Vorsath stared at the plot. "How many places does it need?" "All of them, sir." The second wave came at 1940 the same day. It was not a wave. Sana would spend a long time afterward trying to think of the right word and would never find it. The Concord had, over 4,000 years, developed a great many polite conventions about how one enters a system through a hyperlane terminus, all of which involve arriving one at a time. 1,100 human hulls came through in 94 minutes. They came in blocks of 12 in a rolling column, with the mechanical rhythm of something being fed off a belt, and they did not stop to form up, and they did not stop to signal, and each block was already burning for its assigned orbit before the block behind it had finished emerging. There was no flagship. There was no formation. There was, as far as the Kesh plot could determine, no fleet organization at all, just an unbroken stream of gray, slab-sided ugly ships, none of them alike, all of them the same, every one of them running with its cargo doors already open. The *9th Verdict *S tactical officer, who had been standing at the plot for 11 hours, said, in a voice that had lost all its professional flatness, "Marshal, I have no gun signatures." "Say again." "I have no gun signatures. Not one. 1,100 hulls, 0 capital armament, 0 secondary armament, 0. He stopped. "Sir, 4 of them have point defense. 4. The rest are unarmed *. "Merchant conversions," said Ilek. He said it too fast. "They have stripped their economy bare and sent us cargo hulls with no guns and no armor into a system that is going to fill with debris in 80 days. And they have done it for the theater of it, and half of them will die in them." "Sub-Marshal," said the censor officer. "What?" "They're not merchant conversions, sir." The Kesh looked up from her console and her crest was standing straight up, which Sana had learned meant something between astonishment and fear. "I have hull telemetry. They're broadcasting it in the clear, all of them unencrypted. Registry, tonnage, berth count, life support rating, structural pattern." She swallowed. "Sir, they're not conversions. They were built like this. The oldest one on my plot is 141 years old, and it came off the line with a habitat spine already in it." Ilek Vorsath said nothing at all. And Fleet Marshal V. Harrow Setcon, standing very still at the center of his own flag deck with one hand resting on the plot rail, said quietly, "Show me the berth count." The censor officer worked. The number came up on the main display in Concord standard notation, and it was so large that for a moment the whole flag deck simply looked at it, the way you look at a word in a language you don't read. 1,100 hulls, 16,400,000 berths. In the first wave, which had taken 94 minutes. "Marshal," said the comm officer, and her voice cracked, "Terran Command is hailing." Sir, they're not hailing us. They're hailing the Speaker of Groves on an open channel to the whole system." "Put it up." The hollow bloomed over the plot, and it was not an admiral. It was a woman in a stained gray coverall with her sleeves pushed up and a slate under one arm, standing in what was very obviously a cargo control room with people moving and shouting behind her, and she looked about 50 and profoundly unimpressed with the universe, and the caption under her read, "OYELARAN, R. Commodore, Terran Reserve, Lift Command." "Speaker of Groves," she said. "Ruth Oyelaran. Sorry we're late, we came the long way around. I'm going to talk fast because there isn't time to be graceful and I'd rather be rude than slow. Is that all right?" There was a pause. Then Tahanueth's voice, very carefully controlled, "Please." "Right." Oyelaran didn't look at any notes. "Here's what's about to happen to your planet and you're going to hate all of it, so I want you to hear it from me before you see it. In 11 hours the first landing frames come down. They're big. They're loud." They'll flatten anything within 400 meters of the setdome, and I've picked 11,000 setdome sites, and about 900 of them are on ground your people consider sacred, and I need you to give me those 900 in the next 6 hours, because if I route around them it costs me 4 days, and 4 days is 190 million people. That's the first thing. Silence on the Kesh flag deck, absolute silence. Second thing. My ships will be in your atmosphere continuously for the next 79 days. Not visits, a conveyor. You will not see the sun properly again. The noise will not stop day or night, and every window in every grove town is going to shake for 11 weeks, and there will be people who go mad from it, and I am sorry, and I am not going to stop. Third thing, I need every road, every canal, every rail line under my traffic control, not yours, starting now, because I can lift faster than you can walk, and the bottleneck in this operation is not my ships, it's your feet. Fourth thing, Oyalaran's face changed very slightly. I've read the ledger. The Concord did honest work. Their numbers right for their hulls. It's not right for mine. She shifted the slate. Speaker, I want to be careful here because I've done this before and I know what hope does to people when you hand it to them badly. So I'm not going to promise you anything. I'm going to tell you a number and then I'm going to spend 79 days trying to earn it. All right. All right, said Tehanuith. I'm bringing 41,000 hulls, said Ruth Oyalaran. The rest are 90 days behind me because they were on the far side of human space when the order went out, and they turned around inside a shift and they didn't ask why. 41,000 hulls, staged rotation, 19-day cycle to the receiving worlds. And I don't like the receiving worlds. By the way, I'm building better ones. We'll get to that. With 4 rotations and a full lift, I make it 3,090 million. The number hung in the air over the plot. That's everyone, said Tehanuith. Her voice had gone strange. Commodore, that is everyone. That's everyone I can move, Oyalaran said. It is not everyone. There's 15 million in your groves that I cannot move, and I've read the file, and I know what you told the marshal, and I want to talk about that separately because I think we may be about to have an argument. There is no argument. They cannot be lifted. It would kill them. Yes, said Oyalaran, so don't lift them. A pause. I don't understand. Lift the asterisk ground asterisk speaker, said Commodore Ruth Oyalaran. Leave them exactly where they are. Cut the shelf out from under them and take the whole thing. They called it soil extraction on the schedules, which was, Sana thought, one of the great flat lies of the human language. What it actually was, 140 heavy-lift hulls, each one a common hull with its cassettes stripped out and replaced with a single vast open bay, standing on landing frames in the valleys of the Vesh homeworld with their doors open to the sky. And crews human, and after the 4th day Vesh, and after the 9th day Kesh, walking a grove with survey lasers, marking a perimeter. And then the cutting frames, which were mining equipment, honestly, unglamorous plasmalance rigs designed for asteroid work, brought down and rigged upside down and driven into black loam. They cut in circles, 40 meters across, 24 meters deep, down through the loam and the clay and into the granite shelf and then asterisk undercutting the whole plug, so that what came up was not a tree and not a body but a cylinder of a world. 11,000 tons of soil and rock and root and water and worms and fallen leaves, and standing on top of it, upright, unhurt, still holding whatever they had been holding, and anchored of the Vesh. The first one they lifted was in the Ith Valley, and Tehanuith stood and watched it, and so did 4,000 of her people, and so did Sana Okafor, who had come down on the 3rd shuttle and had not slept in 31 hours. The lift frame took the strain. 11,000 tons came off the ground with a sound like a mountain clearing its throat, and it rose slowly, rotating very slightly, trailing a curtain of black earth that fell away in a soft rain, and they anchored an old Vesh, so old that the bark of him had gone silver white, so old that his upper branches had begun to leaf, stood on the top of his rising island with his face turned up. And he did not move, because he could not move, and because he had not moved in 90 years. But he opened his eyes. Sana was close enough to see it. She would be sure of that for the rest of her life. He opened his eyes and looked at the sky he had been looking at for 90 years, and the sky was moving now, and he was moving in it. And beside her Tehanuith made a sound Sana had never heard a Vesh make and would never hear one make again. They put him in the bay of the asterisk grain of the field, and packed the plug in stabilizing foam, and turned the bay lights to the exact spectrum of Teshin at noon, and then they went and got another one. They lifted 4 million anchored off the surface of Tessarine in 61 days, one at a time, 11,000 tons at a time, and they lifted the hills the anchored stood on, and where the roots of 2 anchored had grown together underground, and they very often had the crews cut a plug 90 meters wide instead and took them both, because the alternative was to cut between them, and nobody, not one human crew in 11 weeks, was willing to do that. The 11 million Grovekin who had refused to board boarded. They boarded because the humans had done the one thing that made boarding possible, which was to make leaving not be leaving. On the 19th day, Sub-Marshal Ilik Vorsath came down to the surface. He came without escort and without announcement, and he found Sana in a mud-choked staging yard outside a grove town called Sevenwaiter, standing on the roof of a ground car with a slate in one hand and a chemical light in the other, hoarse, filthy, and shouting traffic instructions at a queue of 11,000 Vesh that stretched back 4 kilometers into the dark. He waited until she was done. It took 40 minutes. Then she climbed down off the car and stood in front of him in the mud, so tired she had stopped being able to make her face do anything, and he looked down at her for a while. "You have not slept," he said. "No, sir." "Neither have I." He looked around the yard. The floodlights, the queue, the vast squat shape of the asterisk third shift standing on its frame half a kilometer away with the loading spine lit up like a cathedral, and cassettes going up at one every 40 seconds, clang and lock and the next. "I have been reading your Annex 6. Sana said nothing. "It is 900,000 pages long," said Ilik Vorsath. "It is the dullest document I have ever encountered. It contains no fleet dispositions. It contains no strategic doctrine. It contains," and his voice did something complicated, "for 194 years, Lieutenant, it has contained asterisk the dimensions of a box. Page 1, Article 1, the pattern, 40 meters by 12. Everything else in that document, all 900,000 pages of it, is a consequence of page 1. "Yes, sir." "And you sealed it?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" And for the first time there was something raw in it. "Why in the name of every ancestor would you asterisk hide asterisk this? You have spent 2 centuries letting this galaxy think you were a joke. My own species has spent 2 centuries preparing to fight you, Lieutenant, at enormous cost, on the assumption that behind that seal there was a knife. And it was a asterisk box asterisk. It was a asterisk box asterisk and a habit, and you let asterisk me stand up in the grand muster and say that you built barns and called them battleships." He stopped. He was breathing hard. "Do you understand that I was asterisk right? That is the thing I cannot, Lieutenant. I was asterisk right asterisk. You build barns. You have always built barns. I simply did not understand what a barn is asterisk for asterisk." Sana wiped her face with the back of her wrist and only spread the mud around. "Sir," she said, "the answer's going to make you angry." "I am already angry. We sealed it because we knew what you'd think it was." Ilik Vorsath went very still. "Our Admiralty ran the analysis 194 years ago," Sana said, "right after we joined. They looked at the Concord and they looked at the reading of strength and they understood the rule, a species that cannot show its strength has no strength. You said it yourself in the assembly, sir. That's the rule. And they looked at what we had and they realized that if we declared it, if we stood up on that floor and read out 390,000 hulls and 400 million cassettes and a species-wide drill for moving 2 billion people in 19 days, she spread her hands. What would you have heard, sir? Honestly, in the reading of strength, what would the Kesh ascendancy have heard? Ilik Vorsath did not answer. You'd have heard an invasion fleet, Sana said. The largest troop-lift capability in galactic history, sitting in the hands of a species you'd known for 11 years. And you'd have been asterisk right to hear it, sir, because it is that. The same ship that moves 1,600 refugees moves 1,600 soldiers. There has never been any difference. The box doesn't care what's in it. The floodlights hummed. 4 kilometers of Vesh shuffled forward 1 pace in the dark. So they sealed it, Sana said, and they wrote a memorandum and it's still in the file and everybody in the reserve reads it in their first year and it says, we cannot prove what we would do with this. We can only be seen doing it. Wait, she looked up at him. That's the whole doctrine of the Terran Reserve. 1 word. Wait. Wait until someone needs it. Because until that day, anything we say is just a species with an enormous fleet asking to be trusted. She turned back toward the queue. 194 years, she said. That's how long we waited. We had it the whole time, sir. We could have come to the assembly with it any year we liked, and we'd never have been laughed at again. Then why did you not? Sana looked out at 11,000 people, standing in the mud with their children on their backs, waiting for a ship. Because nobody needed us yet, she said. And somewhere over the western ridge the asterisk third shift finished loading and lit her frames and began, ponderously, unbeautifully, to climb. And Sub-Marshal Ilik Vorsath of the Kesh ascendancy watched a grain silo full of 94,000 living people rise into the sky of a dying world and put his hand over his eyes. The lift ran, and it was not a miracle, and Sana Okafor would spend the rest of her life correcting people who called it one. A miracle is something that arrives. The lift was something that was asterisk done by 4 million human beings and eventually by twice that many Vesh and Kesh and Sulvani and Talon and anyone else who could carry a box in shifts badly in the rain for 11 weeks. And the thing Sana remembered afterward was not the ships. It was the paperwork. It was the manifest discipline. Every person who boarded got a chip and a number and a berth, and the berth was asterisk theirs. And it was written down in 3 places, because the single most reliable way to destroy an evacuation is to lose track of who you have moved. That was the Concord's own bitter lesson from the Marathon Cascade. In the last year the great powers had begun, in their panic, to lift people without recording them. And families had been split across 19 light years and had never, in 800 years, found each other again. The humans recorded everything, obsessively, in triplicate, on paper as well as in the system, and they bolted a printed manifest to the inside of every cassette door. It was the water, 400,000 liters a day, moved by hand in the last kilometer, because you cannot pipe water to a queue that moves. It was the sanitation, which nobody ever puts in the stories, and which killed more people in bad evacuations than the disaster ever did. It was the sick and the dying, and the 11 hospital hulls that hung in low orbit with their bays open like enormous white mouths, and the kindly light asterisk, 4 kilometers long, carrying no weapon of any kind, with a crew of 31,000, in continuous service for 90 years, and never once in 90 years doing anything but this. It was the arguments, the Vesh who would not leave their libraries and had to be reasoned with, tree by tree, and the humans who said asterisk fine, bring the library, will cut a bay and were told by their own logistics officers that there was no room, and who found room. The Kesh quartermasters who could not understand why the humans refused to prioritize the young over the old, that is the ledger commodore, that is doctrine asterisk, and Ruth Oyalaran, who did not raise her voice, saying, Your doctrine is for when you can't take everyone. I can take everyone. Load the queue in the order it stands. It was, above all, the boredom, which Sana had never understood until she lived in it. The vast, grinding, unglamorous 40-second rhythm of cassettes going up a spine, clang, and lock. And the next, for 79 days until she heard it in her sleep and would hear it in her sleep for 20 years. By day 41, they had lifted 1,400,000,000 people. By day 52, they had lifted 2,100,000,000, and the yardship asterisk ceaseless industry, 9 kilometers of ugly. A factory with an engine had finished spinning up the first 2 of the new receiving habitats out at the Tessarine Trojan Point, because Commodore Oyalaran had not liked the receiving worlds and had simply built better ones out of the asteroids that happened to be lying around. That is what a yardship is for. And on day 55, the Concord Survey Office revised the trajectory of Object Kethra 9. The message came to the flag deck of the asterisk 9th verdict at 02:40, and it was 11 lines long, and Sana read it standing up. And then she sat down on the deck, right there, in front of the Fleet Marshal of the Kesh Ascendancy, because her legs stopped working. The object had a companion. It had always had a companion. It was a stripped binary remnant, and the second body was small and dark and had sat directly behind the primary from the Concord's viewing angle for 9 weeks, which nobody had done anything wrong to miss, and which did not matter at all now. The 2-body solution changed the periastron, not by much, by 19 days. 19 days, said Ruth Oyalaran on the hollow, and for the first time since she had appeared over the plot she looked like a woman who had been awake for 11 weeks. Right, all right, 19 days. You have lifted 2.4 billion, said Vesh Khan. I have 700 million people standing in queues, Marshal. Her voice was quiet. 700 million, and a rotation cycle of 19 days, and my hulls are. She looked off camera. Someone said something. She closed her eyes. 60% of my hulls are in transit or at the receiving habs. They are not here. They cannot be here in 19 days. I have 11,000 hulls in system and berths for 280 million, and the rest of my fleet is going to arrive at Tessarine 4 days after this planet comes apart. Nobody on the flag deck moved. So I break the rotation, Oyalaran said. I don't cycle. I load everything I have and I hold them here in orbit in the bays in the middle of a tidal debris envelope until the second wave arrives to take them off me. It means every ship I own sits inside the worst hour that solar system will ever have, loaded. That is not possible, said Vorsath. It's arithmetic, Sub-Marshal, it's not a mood. She rubbed her eyes. The problem isn't the holding. My hulls will hold, that's what the ablative mass is for, that's what its asterisk always been for, we build for weather. The problem is I'm 420 million berths short, and I cannot conjure hulls, and every hull in this galaxy that can carry a person is already here or is already coming. And the flag deck of the asterisk 9th verdict was very quiet, because that was not true, and every single person standing on it knew it was not true. Fleet Marshal Vesh Khan stood at the plot rail with his back to the room. Sub-Marshal, he said. Sir, how many soldiers does a Kesh dreadnought carry? Vorsath did not move. 11,000 Marines, sir, plus crew. That is not what I asked. Vesh turned around. I asked how many soldiers she carries, the bays, the assault bays, the barracks decks, the drop hold, the muster hall, the armory, the 200,000 cubic meters of empty volume that every dreadnought in our fleet carries, so that on the day of the invasion that has never come, we can put an army on somebody's ground. His voice did not rise. It got, somehow, enormously heavy. How many people fit inside a Kesh dreadnought, Sub-Marshal, if you take out everything that is for killing and put in everything that is for living? The silence went on a long time. 400,000, said Vorsath. Sir, approximately. 90 dreadnoughts, said Viharoset Khan. 400 cruisers, 11,000 escorts. Sana was doing the arithmetic before he finished. She looked up, and her voice came out very small. Sir, she said, that's 130 million. It is not 420, said Iluk. No, Sana said, but the Sulvani have 600 battle spheres, and the Cathan lance frames are hollow sir. They're built around a launch void, and the Orevid needles have the whole spinal cavity for the accelerator. And if you pull the accelerator, she was standing up now. She did not remember standing up. Sir, every warship in the galaxy is mostly empty. That's what a warship is. It's a shell around a gun and a place to put the people who serve the gun and a hold for the army you're going to land. It's a box. Everybody built a box. She laughed, and it came out ragged. We just never took the gun out. Fleet Marshal Viharoset Khan looked at her for a moment. Then he walked to the comm station, and he keyed the open channel, not the Concord channel, not the command net, the open channel, the one that every ship in the system and every relay for 400 light-years was listening on, and he said, "This is Viharoset Khan of the *9th Verdict*, Fleet Marshal of the Kesh Ascendancy, to every warship of the Long Concord. Strip your guns. I do not ask you to send them home. I ask you to cut them out and leave them in orbit and come down to Tessarine with an empty hull, and I will tell you plainly that this is an unlawful order, that I have no authority to give it, and that I am giving it anyway. There are 700 million people standing in the mud on that planet. They have been standing in lines for 11 weeks, and they have not rioted once, because they were told there would be a ship, and there was always a ship. Come and be the ship. I have been a soldier for 61 years, and I have never once been asked to save anything. I did not know that I was waiting to be asked. Set Khan out." They cut the guns out. It is a strange thing to watch, and there were recordings, and the galaxy would watch them for 1,000 years afterward. The great Kesh dreadnoughts hanging over a green world with their spinal accelerators drawn out of them like splinters, 4 kilometers of weapon coming free of 4 kilometers of hull, and tenders towing the accelerators away to a graveyard orbit, and where the gun had been there was a hole, and into the hole went cassettes. Human cassettes, 40 meters by 12, 1,600 berths. They did not fit. Of course they did not fit. The Kesh had never signed the Pattern Act, and the mounting geometry was wrong by 11 centimeters in one axis and a full meter in the other. So the ceaseless industry retooled its lines in 14 hours and began producing a Kesh pattern cassette, and then a Sulvani pattern, and then a Cathan pattern, at a rate the Concord's industrial office refused to believe until it sent an inspector aboard, who came back and made a report, and then went and sat down somewhere quiet for a while. The Sulvani stripped, the Cathan stripped, the Orevid pulled their spinal accelerators, and the little Talon couriers, which had never carried a gun in their lives and had nothing to strip, came anyway and did the thing they could do, which was to fly 10,000 shuttle rotations between the surface and the fleet and never once complain. By day 68, there were 19,000 warships in orbit over Tessarine with no weapons aboard any of them, and there was not, in that entire volume of space, a single armed hull. It was, and this was noted at the time by an appalled Talon archivist named Aelith, who was standing on the *9th Verdict*, S flag deck with her recorder running, the most defenseless assembly of military power in the recorded history of the galaxy. She wrote that line in her log. It became, eventually, quite famous. The last 9 days were the bad ones. The object came in, and it did not look like anything. That was the horror of it, and nobody had been prepared for it. Kethra 9 was 16 kilometers across, and it had the mass of 2/3 of a star, and it was invisible, a hole in the starfield, a place where the light bent, and it came on at 1100 kilometers a second and made no sound and had no face. Tessarine began to come apart 4 days before Periastron. Not dramatically. That was the other thing nobody was prepared for. The planet did not explode. It strained asterisk. The tides came up, not water, the crust, and the whole surface of the world began to breathe, rising and falling 40 centimeters twice a day, and then a meter, and then more, and the granite shelf under the groves cracked along lines laid down in the first age of the planet, and the atmosphere started to go, peeling off the day side in a long luminous streamer that was, everyone agreed, the most beautiful thing any of them had ever seen. And the ship stayed, because there were still 11 million people in the queues. The debris came up first, dust, then gravel, then rock, flung off the mountains and up into orbit by an escape velocity that was dropping by the hour. And it came up fast and it came up everywhere, and it hit the fleet. The Kesh dreadnoughts, with their laminate armor built to stop a spinal round, shrugged it off. The human hulls, with 80 meters of cheap sacrificial ablative mass over the bow foamed slag, the cheapest material in human space, poured on in layers at the yards because a common hull spends its life in the debris belts and the ice fields and nobody wanted to pay for real armor, shrugged it off too, and then kept shrugging it off, hour after hour, day after day, and the whole time they were loading. The asterisk third shift lost her forward frames on day 73 and stayed on the ground with her spine bent and loaded through her aft doors for 19 more hours before her captain ordered her up. The Widow's Mite took a 400-ton rock through her number 2 bay and lost 11 crew, and she sealed the bay and did not leave. The asterisk Anchor of Hours, Sana's first ship, the ship she had grown up on, the ship her mother had served for 30 years, went down into the atmosphere on day 76 to lift a stranded column of 200,000 out of a valley that everyone else had written off, and she went in under a debris fall that the plot said she would not survive, and she did not survive it, and she came out anyway on 9 of her 12 frames. Streaming atmosphere from a hole in her flank that you could have flown a shuttle through, with 200,000 people in her cassettes and every one of them alive. She made orbit, she offloaded. Then she came apart at the seams, slowly, over 9 hours, and they got everyone out but 4. Sana was on the flag deck of the asterisk 9th verdict when the asterisk Anchor of Hours died. She did not cry. She had a queue running, and the queue did not stop, and she stood at her console and moved 11,000 people through a berth allocation, while the ship she was born on burned across the plot in front of her, and she did not look away, because there was no time, and because the sound was still going. Clang and lock. And the next. Periastron came at 06:11 on the 84th day. By then the surface of Tessarine had no atmosphere left worth the word, and the seas were gone, and the groves were gone, and there was nobody on it, because the last shuttle had come off the last landing frame at 02:44 with 411 Vesh aboard, and a human loadmaster named Petrov standing in the door doing what loadmasters have done since the beginning of loadmasters, which is to count. 411, that was the last number. The fleet held station at 11,000 kilometers, which was insanely close, which was the closest they could hold and still be inside the shadow of the planet when the debris came, and the planet went to pieces around them and the fleet stayed and took it on its bow. 19,000 warships with their guns cut out. 41,000 human hulls with their bays full. And in the bays, 3,094,611 Vesh, alive, breathing, packed 1,600 to a cassette in 3-tier bunks, listening to the hull ring like a struck bell every 11 seconds as the world they were born on hit it. And 4 million anchored, standing in the cargo bays of 140 heavy-lift hulls on plugs of black loam, 11,000 tons each, under lights tuned to the exact spectrum of the sun of Teshin at noon. Tessarine came apart at 06, 11, and it took 11 hours, and the fleet watched. All of it, every ship. Because Ruth Oyelaren had put it on every screen in every cassette in the fleet and had said, on the general channel, in a voice that finally, sounded like a woman who was about to fall over. Anybody who wants to look, look. Anybody who doesn't, don't. There's no wrong way to do this. But I've done it before, and I'll tell you what I know. You'll want to have seen it. Not now. In 40 years. 3 billion Vesh watched their world die from 3 tiers of bunks in 11,000 ships, and it made a sound in the fleet. A low, continuous sound. A species grieving in a confined space. And the humans who had been awake for 11 weeks stood in the aisles of the cassettes with them and did not say anything, because there is nothing to say. And because they had all read the same memorandum in their first year in the reserve, and it had one word in it. Wait. Wait until they need you. Then be there. The Long Concord reconvened at Kesh Sub-Marshal 111 days later, in the same hall, under the same iron-colored clouds, and there were no ships in the sky. That was the first thing every delegate saw as their shuttle came in, and it was the thing none of them had any idea how to think about. The tiered ranks, the 90 Kesh dreadnoughts, the Solvani spheres, the Cathan lance frames, 4,000 years of hierarchy hung in vacuum like beads on a wire, were not there. They were at Tessarine, in the Trojan habitats, unloading. They would be unloading for another 4 months. The sky over Kesh Sub-Marshal was empty, and the reading of strength was scheduled for the 9th hour. Sana Okafor came into the hall through the observer's entrance and stopped, because there was nowhere to sit. The observer's gallery, which had held perhaps 40 people the last time she was in this room, was full. It was full of Vesh. 600 of them, standing. Vesh do not sit in unfamiliar rooms, silent, gray-green, filling the gallery from rail to wall. And they had come from the Trojan habitats, and they had asked for nothing except to be allowed to stand there. And a hand touched her shoulder, and she turned, and it was Tehan with. "Lieutenant," she said, "we saved you a place." They had, in the middle of the gallery at the rail, there was a gap in the crowd exactly 1 human wide. Sana Okafor went and stood in it, and the Vesh closed around her, and the reading of strength began. It went as it had always gone. The Kesh recited, the Solvani recited. Down through the long roll, hull by hull, and everybody in the hall could feel how strange it was, because every species there was reading out numbers that were no longer true. The spinal accelerators of 90 dreadnoughts were in a graveyard orbit at Tessarine with cargo tags welded to them. The lance frames were full of bunks. The reading of strength was being read out of a book that the galaxy had, without quite deciding to, stopped living in. Nobody struck their palms. Not once. The old salute did not come, and no one seemed to know why, and the recitations got shorter and quieter, until the speaker came to the end of the roll and stopped and looked up and said, into a silence that had already begun before she spoke, "The Terran Compact." Ambassador Denard rose. She did not have a slate. She stood with her hands at her sides, and she was still small, and her hair was still iron-colored, and her face still gave away nothing, and she said, "Under Article 9, the Terran Compact withdraws the seal from Annex 6 and submits its true order of battle to this body." The hall did not move. "The Terran Compact fields," Denard said, 11 line vessels of the 2nd class, 41 escorts, and 210 patrol craft. Spinal weight, none. The Terran Reserve fields 391,400 hulls of the common pattern. Of these, 11,000 are naval. The remainder are merchant, industrial, survey, agricultural, and passenger vessels held under the Pattern Act, and are the private property of their owners, and are subject to requisition by the Reserve at 90 hours' notice, and have been for 194 years, and no owner has ever refused. The Terran Reserve maintains 411 million habitat cassettes in 1,100 orbital depots. Each cassette carries 1,600 berths and 90 days of closed-loop life support. Production capacity, current, is one cassette every 11 minutes across 9 yards. Surge capacity is one every 90 seconds. The Terran Reserve maintains 19 yardships of the Ceaseless class, each capable of constructing orbital habitation for 11 million persons from local asteroidal material within 60 days of arrival. The Terran Reserve conducts a full mobilization drill, designated the General Lift, once every 10 years. It is compulsory. It is universal. The last was conducted 5 years ago and cycled 2,400,000,000 persons through berths in 19 days. Denard paused. Total lift capacity of the Terran Reserve at 90 hours notice to any point in the settled galaxy, sustained for 400 days. 6,580,000,000 souls. And the Long Concord of settled stars fell silent. It is important to understand what kind of silence it was, because there would be a great deal written about it afterward, and most of it would be wrong. It was not the silence of fear. There was fear in it, the way there is salt in the sea, but fear was not the shape of it. It was the silence of 900 delegates doing arithmetic. Because that is what the reading of strength is, asterisk for asterisk. That is the whole 4,000-year-old machinery of it. You stand up and you say your number, and every other species in the room does the arithmetic, and the arithmetic tells them what would happen if. That is how the Concord had kept the peace since before most of its members had writing. Say the number. Let them count. So they counted. 6,580,000,000 souls delivered anywhere in the settled galaxy, at 90 hours notice, sustained for 400 days. And every strategist in that hall, every Kesh staff officer, every Sulvani war planner, every Cathan logistician who had ever spent a night working out how many divisions you could put on a hostile shore and how long you could keep them there, followed the arithmetic to its end, and arrived, all of them, at the same place at the same moment. Because the box does not care what is in it. 6 billion souls is 6 billion soldiers. It is 19 yardships in your asteroid belt, turning your own rocks into fortresses in 60 days. It is a species that can put more bodies on your ground in 4 days than you have ever had citizens, that has asterisk practice doing it every 10 years for 2 centuries, that has the manifest discipline and the water discipline, and the loading rhythm burned so deep into its bones that a 26-year-old lieutenant can run a queue of 11,000 strangers in the dark and in the mud without raising her voice. The Long Concord had spent 194 years wondering whether there was a knife behind the seal. There was no knife. There had never been a knife. There was something much worse, and the whole hall understood it in one breath. There had never needed to be a knife. Humanity had possessed, for the entire duration of its membership in the Concord, the single greatest instrument of conquest in the history of the galaxy, and had built it out of grain silos, and left it parked in 100 and 1,100 depots, and used it exactly once, and used it to carry 3 billion strangers away from a dying star. That was the arithmetic. It took about 9 seconds. And then the silence changed, and became something else. And it was the second silence, the long one, the one that never really ended. And it was the sound of an entire galaxy understanding, simultaneously and permanently, that it had spent 2 centuries laughing at the most powerful species alive, because that species had never once given them a reason to stop. Sub-Marshal Ilek Vorsath rose from the Kesh benches. He did not look well. He had not looked well since Tessarine. He stood in the place where he had stood 111 days ago and said that a species that cannot show its strength has no strength, and he opened his mouth, and nothing came out. He tried again. "Speaker," he said, "I withdraw my remarks." He sat down, and Fleet Marshal Viharo Setkan stood up. He had something in his hand. "Speaker," he said, "before this body adjourns, I must place a document in the record. The Marshal is recognized. This is a sealed instrument of the Kesh ascendancy. He held it up, a small dark cylinder, the length of a Kesh forearm, and the red seal on the end of it was broken now and hung in two halves. It was issued to me 121 days ago. It was delivered to my flag by courier while I was in transit to Tessarine. Its terms were, to be opened by the commanding officer of the *9th verdict upon the unsealing of Tessarine Annex 6. Nobody in the hall breathed. I opened it 11 days ago, Vesh Khan said, aboard my own ship, in orbit over the grave of Tessarine, with 400,000 Vesh asleep in my assault bays. He turned the broken cylinder over in his enormous hand. I did not open it before. I was ordered to open it and I did not, and I will answer for that, and I will answer for it gladly. I am going to read it aloud now, to this body, and to the open channel, and to every relay in the settled galaxy, because I have concluded that the ascendancy's shame is not more important than the galaxy's understanding, and because I am too old and too tired to be careful. The Kesh delegation did not move to stop him. Sana would think about that for the rest of her life. Not one of them moved. He read it. Standing Contingency Order, 6th Seal. In the event of the unsealing of Tessarine Annex 6, should the Annex disclose a reserve armament exceeding 1,000 capital hulls, the Ascendancy assesses that the strategic balance of the Concord is void, and that no negotiated settlement is available. The commanding officer of the *9th verdict is authorized and directed to move immediately against the Tessarine yards at Callisto, Vega, and the Lagrange depots, and to destroy the reserve in dock before it can be manned. He lowered the cylinder. That was my order, he said. That was what my government sent me to Tessarine to do, and I want this body to understand precisely what it means, because I have had 11 days to understand it and I am still not finished. It means that if the humans had done what any of us would have done, if they had stood up in this hall 2 centuries ago and read out their true strength, as we demanded of them, as we mocked them for refusing, my ships would have burned their yards. It means their reserve would have died in dock, 390,000 hulls, 400 million cassettes. It means that 111 days ago, when the ledger was convened, the Concord would have counted its hulls and found 118 million berths, and the Speaker of Groves would have gone home to tell 3 billion people that they were an entry in a document. It means that Tessarine would have died with 3 billion souls on it, and this assembly would have mourned, and we would have written a beautiful preamble about it, and not one of us would ever have known that it had not been necessary. He set the broken cylinder down on the desk in front of him. They knew, he said. That is the last thing. The humans knew. They ran the analysis 194 years ago, and they knew exactly what we would see if they showed us, and they knew what we would do, and they sealed the box and they let us laugh at them for 2 centuries, rather than lose the thing that could save someone one day. I stood in this hall, and I told them that a species that cannot show its strength has no strength. I was wrong in every possible way that a soldier can be wrong. I was wrong about their strength, and I was wrong about what strength is, and I was wrong about them, and I have spent my entire life preparing to fight the wrong enemy, and I want you all to know that when I finally met them, when I finally saw what was behind the seal, it was a 26-year-old girl standing on the roof of a ground car in the mud, at 3 in the morning, shouting at a queue. That is the reserve. That is what we were afraid of. The Kesh ascendancy will submit its yards for conversion to the pattern within the year. I have already given the order. I have no authority to give it. I have discovered late in my life that this is not a reason to refrain. He sat down, and the hall stayed silent. The Long Concord struck the ledger of necessary loss from its books 11 months later, after the longest debate in its history, and it did not replace it with anything, because there was nothing to replace it with. In the place where it had been, it entered the pattern 40 meters by 12, and the reading of strength was amended by unanimous vote to require every member species to declare, alongside its guns, its lift. That first amended reading took 4 days. Nobody complained. Several delegations wept. The Vesh live now on 11 habitats at the Tessarine Trojan Point, and on a green world called Second Grove that a converted Kesh yardship terraformed for them over 19 years. 3,094,611 of them came off Tessarine, and there are more of them now, and the groves grow. The 4 million anchored were replanted. All of them. It took 6 years and it was done by hand, and the old silver-white one from the Ith Valley, the one who opened his eyes, lived another 11 years on Second Grove under a different sun, and people came from 400 light years to sit with him, and he answered them slower and slower, and 1 year he didn't. Sub-Marshal Ilek Vorsath resigned his commission and spent the rest of his career at the Kesh conversion yards, where he was, by all accounts, an absolute tyrant about tolerances. And Fleet Marshal V. Harrow Set Khan, who was court-martialed and acquitted and court-martialed again and acquitted again, and finally, in exasperation, promoted, never went back to a warship, because there were no more warships to go back to. Sana Okafor made lieutenant commander and turned down a staff post and went back to the lift branch, because she was good at it, and because when they offered her a desk on Kesh HFY she looked at it for a long moment and said, "Sir, with respect, I'd rather be where the boxes are." She served 31 more years. She was aboard the Asterisk Kindly Light at the Orevid ice failure, and she ran the queues at the Hask withdrawal, and she was the officer who took the new anchor of ours down into the ash at Marathon Secundus, which nobody had ever gone back for, and which had been on the human list for 800 years, waiting, because the humans had read the preamble too and had never forgiven it either. And once, late in her life, a young officer asked her what it had been like, that day in the assembly, when humanity unveiled its true military power and the galaxy fell silent. And Sana Okafor, who was old by then, and who had spent her whole life listening to the same 40-second rhythm, thought about it for a while. "They keep calling it a weapon," she said. "It wasn't. That's what nobody ever gets. We didn't show them a weapon, and we didn't show them mercy either. Mercy's what you have when you're strong and you choose not to. We never chose. There was never a moment where we sat down and decided not to conquer anybody. We were just busy." She smiled a little. "We'd been busy for 200 years. We were building boxes." The silence wasn't fear. 900 people did the arithmetic in 9 seconds and all got the same answer. They could have, and they didn't, and they weren't even paying attention. You can be afraid of a knife. You can't be afraid of that. There's nothing to do but go quiet. And then you have to decide what to build next. She looked out the viewport, at the long gray unlovely line of hulls at the depot, at the cassettes going up the spines, one every 40 seconds, day and night, forever. "So they went quiet," she said, "and then they built boxes, all of them. Every species in the galaxy is still building boxes, and nobody has fought a war since, and I don't think it's because we frightened them. I think it's because we gave them something better to do with an empty hull."